There is a moment in almost every life that feels like collapse, not a dramatic movie scene collapse. Not always visible, sometimes it happens quietly. A slow disintegration of identity, the things that once worked stop working. The version of you that once survived stops being enough. Your habits feel hollow, your confidence flickers. The path you thought was stable suddenly feels misaligned. And in that moment, something terrifying begins to form inside your mind. What if I'm falling apart? But what if you're not falling apart? What if you're breaking open? The psychology of transformation is not clean. It is not aesthetic. It is not motivational. It is violent in its subtlety. Before someone becomes strong, clear, disciplined, powerful, or extraordinary, something inside them must fracture. Because you cannot build a new structure on an identity that still feels safe. Growth requires instability, and this is the part nobody talks about. We love the image of greatness. The confident leader, the disciplined creator, the resilient survivor, the person who seems unshakable. But we rarely talk about what came before. The confusion, the humiliation, the failure. The identity crisis, the nights of doubt that felt endless. We celebrate the rebirth, we ignore the breaking. But psychologically, breaking is not optional, it is structural. The human mind is built around patterns. Identity is a pattern, beliefs are patterns. Emotional reactions are patterns. When those patterns are reinforced for years through environment, validation, trauma, success, they harden, they become automatic. And automatic identities do not evolve gently, they resist change. Transformation, real transformation, requires cognitive dissonance. A moment where the old pattern no longer fits reality. Where who you are cannot survive who you need to become, and that moment feels like loss. You lose certainty, you lose predictability. You lose the version of yourself that once felt coherent. Your ego experiences this as danger. The ego's primary job is consistency, stability. It wants you to remain who you have been because who you have been is familiar. Familiar equals safe, but greatness requires unfamiliarity. It requires stepping beyond competence, beyond comfort, beyond the roles that once defined you. And when you begin to outgrow your own identity, the system panics. This panic is often mistaken for failure, but it is reorganization. One of the most misunderstood psychological truths is that before a major breakthrough, people often experience what feels like regression. Confidence drops, motivation dips. Old coping mechanisms resurface, you question everything. Why? Because your brain is dismantling an old map. Imagine trying to build a new city on top of an old one without tearing anything down. Impossible, the structures conflict. The foundations interfere, something has to be demolished. And demolition is loud, it shakes the ground. When you break, you are not becoming weaker. You are becoming destabilized enough to rebuild. Another critical element of transformation is identity death. This sounds dramatic, but psychologically it is precise. Every version of you is built around a story. I am this kind of person, I don't do that, I'm not capable of this, I'm the responsible one, I'm the quiet one, I'm the victim, I'm the achiever. These stories create limits. When life pushes you beyond those limits, the story fractures. And when the story fractures, you feel disoriented. Who am I if I'm not that? That question is the doorway, but it feels like falling. Many people retreat at this stage. They cling to the old identity because it feels safer than emptiness. They repair the cracks instead of allowing collapse, and so they remain small. The individuals who become extraordinary often have one thing in common: they allowed the collapse. They did not immediately rush to rebuild the old version. They sat in the uncertainty. They tolerated the loss of identity, and that tolerance is rare. Another psychological force at play is the breaking of illusion. Before transformation, you must confront the gap between who you think you are and who you actually are. That gap is painful. It reveals weaknesses, blind spots. Avoidance patterns, self-deception, you see where you've been hiding. And seeing it hurts, but greatness is not built on illusion. It is built on clarity. Clarity comes from discomfort. There is also a neurological dimension. When you undergo intense stress, failure, or emotional upheaval, your brain becomes more plastic. Patterns destabilize, new neural pathways can form. Crisis, when processed consciously, accelerates growth. Breakdown creates malleability, but only if you engage it. If you numb it, avoid it, distract yourself from it, the breaking becomes trauma without transformation. The difference between someone who collapses permanently and someone who rises is not pain level. It is engagement. Another powerful psychological shift during breaking is the confrontation with powerlessness. Many people chase control their entire lives. Control of image, control of outcome, control of perception. Breaking strips control away. You cannot control loss. You cannot control failure. You cannot control rejection. In that surrender, something paradoxical happens. You realize control was never the source of strength. Adaptability was. The breaking forces adaptability. And adaptability is the foundation of greatness. Another hidden truth, before someone becomes disciplined, they often experience chaos. Before someone becomes confident, they often experience humiliation. Before someone becomes wise, they often experience confusion. The mind needs contrast. Without darkness, you do not recognize light. Without weakness, you do not understand strength. Transformation is not additive, it is subtractive first. You subtract arrogance, you subtract illusion. You subtract dependency, you subtract the need for validation. What remains is raw, and raw feels vulnerable. But vulnerability is fertile ground. Another psychological element is social isolation. During breaking, people often feel alone. Friends may not understand, old circles may feel misaligned. The person you're becoming doesn't fit the environment you're in. This loneliness is transitional. It is the gap between identities. Many retreat here because the isolation feels unbearable. But those who endure it discover something critical: self-reliance. When external validation disappears, you either collapse or you build internal validation. Greatness requires the latter. Another key aspect is emotional regulation. During transformation, emotions intensify. Anger surfaces, grief resurfaces, fear becomes loud. This is not regression, it is exposure. Suppressed emotions resurface when identity structures weaken. They were always there, breaking simply removes the lid. Processing them creates emotional depth, and emotional depth creates resilience. There is also the dismantling of false ambition. Sometimes you break because you were climbing the wrong mountain. The collapse reveals misalignment. You realize you were chasing approval, not purpose. Status, not meaning. The breaking redirects you. But redirection feels like failure when you're attached to the old destination. Another important psychological truth: transformation requires humility. You must admit you don't know. You must accept that your current strategies are insufficient. You must allow yourself to be a beginner again. Beginners feel fragile, but fragility is temporary. Stagnation is permanent. When you allow yourself to break, you are not choosing suffering. You are choosing evolution. The pain is not the goal, the restructuring is. And restructuring takes time. There is no dramatic overnight shift. There is slow rewiring, repetition, small decisions that contradict the old identity. Each small action builds evidence. Eventually, one day, you notice something subtle. You respond differently, you think differently. You tolerate more, you fear less, and you realize the breaking changed you. Not in a loud way, in a structural way. You are not who you were, and that is the point. Greatness is not perfection. It is integration, integration of weakness. Integration of pain, integration of past mistakes. You become great not because you avoided breaking, but because you metabolized it. And here is the final psychological paradox. If you never break, you never question. If you never question, you never expand. If you never expand, you remain confined to the smallest version of yourself. Breaking is not the end of you, it is the end of the version that was too small. And when you stop fearing the fracture, you begin to understand something extraordinary. The cracking was necessary. Because before something becomes unshakable, it must first be shaken.